Story of Saint Mangat Ramji in English, Part 3. Introduction. This commentator is reading from the book A Master and a Seeker, written by Professor Somraj Gupta. It is available on Amazon.com. Please see the description below and also visit the site samtavad.org for more information. A Master and Seeker, page 35. First paragraph. After his return to Gangotia, Gurudeva remained lost almost constantly in what to us, men of the word, would appear to be contemplation of the divine within. He would leave the dera or place for sojourn, as he called it, at 2 or 3 a.m. to sit on a rock on the bank of the trail and would not return until 10 a.m. Soon after noon, he would resort to the dark forest of Pir Khwaja to return home after the twilight had long turned into darkness. This forest, as already mentioned, was very dense, the frequent haunt of beasts of prey, and, if the villagers could be believed, of evil spirits. There was also a cremation ground on its outer ring. The villagers feared it and avoided it, but not so the 13-year-old lad of our story. What they called home was his wilderness, and what they called forest was his home. Died had he before his death into death, and death does not die, never dies. Comment. After completing his studies till class 8, Mangatji returned home to live with his mother. He spent most of his time in meditation. He spent his nights meditating on the bank of a river and days meditating in a forest. This forest was full of beasts of prey. The superstitious villagers believed that there were evil spirits in this forest. It also had a cremation ground. The villagers avoided it even during the daytime, but not this 13-year-old lad who spent his nights there. So this commentator will now skip page 35 to go on to page 37, bottom paragraph. Men of the world do not easily tolerate the presence among them of a man as radically different from them as was the young Gurudeva. This is the bottom paragraph of page 37. Men of the world do not easily tolerate the presence among them of a man as radically different from them as was the young Gurudeva or Mangatji. Self-complacent and arrogant, they have no eye and ear for what they do not already understand. So it was but natural that his ways should invite sarcasm, ridicule and censure. The honorable titles of an idler, a parasite, an eccentric, a madcap, and the like were freely bestowed upon him. His solitary meditations were a mere obsession in their eyes of the man whose continuous sittings had spared not even the rocks. Even they, as they put it, had been erased smooth. Some among them, the more timid, feared him, for they thought he had tamed the evil spirits into ready obedience. How else could he escape the wrath of Pir Khwaja? He talked to them even while talking alone, was ever in communication with them. That was their explanation of his absent-mindedness, of his self-forgetfulness. Comment. Worldly men do not easily tolerate the presence of a radically different spiritual person. They have eyes but they cannot see. They have ears but cannot hear. Mangatji's ways Mangatji's ways invited all kind of sarcasm and ridicule by the villagers. His meditation was a mere obsession in their eyes. According to them, his continuous sitting had erased smooth even the rocks. Some feared him, thinking that he communicated with the evil spirits of the forest. Page 38, first paragraph. Vilifications, obliquities, and derisions notwithstanding, his fame could not but spread among the people in the surrounding villages. The Muslims called him Pirji, the holy guide and master, and the Hindus Bhagat Mangat, Mangat the devotee, or just Bhagatji, the noble devotee. This homage and reverence did not, however, impress the family. After giving up his studies, he had not cared to prepare himself for any profession, which was a matter of worry among his relations. The strict principles of his father had not left the family in easy circumstances. Earning a living was the clear imperative and could in no way be postponed. Many a time, Pandit Thakur Das, his elder brother, tried his best to make him aware of his obvious duty, and so did his brother-in-law, Pandit Sai Das, and other relations. He would listen to their advice with mute respect, but would not say what he intended to do. Years passed away, but he kept to his ways with no thought of the morrow. Eventually, even his mother had to remind him that he had to do something for a living. Timid were her reminders and hesitant, for she knew in the heart of her hearts that it was only for his care for her that had prevented him from leaving home forever and taking to the life of a renunciate like the rishis of yore. Others could be emphatic in their advice, but not she. His silence on the issue made her deeply apprehensive. Comment. But some Hindus and Muslims in surrounding villages respected Mangatji as a devotee of God. This reverence, however, did not impress his family. After giving up his studies, he had not cared to work in any profession. This was a matter of great worry to his mother and relatives. Earning a living was the clear imperative. He listened to the advice of his relatives with mute respect, but would not say what he intended to do. His mother was afraid that he may leave home permanently to become an ascetic. Page 38, bottom paragraph. 5 years passed away, full 5 years, with no change in his lifestyle. One day, Pandit Thakur Das came from Peshawar, where he worked as a clerk in the office of the Military Engineering Services. Ganeshi Devi asked him to take Mangat to Peshawar and get him some job at an office. The Pandit invited Guru Deva to Peshawar, did his best to persuade him to come there, but with no success. His long, well-meaning speech could evoke no response except that of an irritating silence. So, in total exasperation, he told mother to make him understand the things. The officers in his office were, he said, happy with him and would not turn down his request. There would be, he added, no difficulty in getting him a job. The ultimate decision, of course, would be his. He perhaps knew best what was right or not right for him. He left for Peshawar, annoyed, washing his hands of the entire affair. It was now the turn of mother to persuade him to go to Peshawar. To console her, he agreed to do her bidding and followed his half-brother to Peshawar. It was the year 1922, full 6 years after he had left school. Pandit Thakurdas, true to his word, got him a job at the Military Engineering Service office. 2 or 3 months later, he got him a regular job at the office of the Controller of Military Accounts. Comment. "5 years passed away with no change in his lifestyle. One day, his half-brother offered to get him a clerical job in a city called Peshawar. But Mangat did not give any reply. Later, he agreed to take the job in order to reduce worry of his mother." Page 39, bottom paragraph. The system of education the British introduced in India was primarily meant for recruiting Indians for small administrative jobs. In those days, the days we are talking about, India was largely illiterate. Jobs were few, and fewer still were the persons qualified for them. To be a clerk of the lowest rank, which they called lower division clerk, one had to be a matriculate, have to have at least 10 years of successful training in education. Gurudeva was not even a matriculate, but the British officers had great discretionary powers and could employ, if they were satisfied, even underqualified persons. It must be said to their credit that they generally used their powers with true discretion. The officers must have been satisfied with the abilities of the young man, which, as we know, were extraordinary. With the job secured, the family felt relieved, for his future was now secure, even though the pay was small. What else could be done for a man who would not study, despite his abilities and his keen intellect? He had to reconcile himself to a hard life. Even though Mangat was not qualified to be a clerk of the lowest rank, he got this job at the discretion of British officers. They were satisfied with his abilities. Even though his pay was small, his family felt relieved because his future seemed secure now. What else could be done for a man who would not study despite his keen intellect? Page 40, a master and a seeker, first paragraph. They did not know that Gurudeva had accepted the job to free his mother from her anxieties, not to make his future secure. Except for attending office, his lifestyle continued as before. The same silence, the same less than Spartan diet, only a step short of starvation, a little rest in the evening, followed by almost a night-long self-absorption. At the office, he would not participate in the conversations the clerk would indulge in to while away the tedium of their jobs. Their crude jokes could not invoke even a trace of a smile on his face. He would attend to his work despite many a mild provocation and ironical hint. The calm on his face was invulnerable, his detachment intimidating, his bearing all serious. The ardent fervor of his meditation had made his body soft and his complexion shiny. Many an expression would appear and disappear on his face like the surface of still waters. There were moments, many of them, when he would be lost in himself, his eyes closed and his face frighteningly impersonal, the files lying open before him. An awesome silence would then envelop the room, his colleagues gazing at him in wonder and amazement that bordered on dread. Comment. His relatives did not know that Mangatji had accepted the job to free his mother from her anxiety, not to make his future secure. His lifestyle continued as before, the same meager diet, only a step short of starvation, the same night-long meditation, and the same silence. He attended to his work and did not participate in small talk with his colleagues. Many times he would be lost in contemplation of God. His colleagues gazed at him in wonder.
Page 40, bottom paragraph. These withdrawals could not fail to rouse the curiosity and interest of his colleagues. During lunch hour, they put to him many a question which he avoided to answer in the beginning, but the questions became persistent, the tone of asking serious, with a clear ring of sincerity and respect in it. So he had to talk to them, speak of the spiritual possibilities of man, of his destiny and destination. In the conversations on these matters, his voice would assume varied tones, intonation, and rhythms. When he woke up from his contemplation, his voice was soft and calm. When he was in his normal moods, it had a ring of authority and certainty, the pitch often rising to persuasiveness and persuasiveness into a commanding eloquence. His colleagues were so much impressed by these dialogues that they would often visit him at home without a notice, much less an invitation. So irresistible was the inner prompting to be near him that they would not care for ordinary formalities, not even for inconvenient timings. He became an object of conversation among his colleagues, among the other employees, among their neighbors and acquaintances. A local celebrity in the making, no doubt. Comment. His personality roused the curiosity of his colleagues. During lunch hour, they persistently asked him many questions. So he talked about spiritual matters with them. His colleagues were so impressed that they would often visit him at home without a notice. They irresistibly wanted to be near him. He became an object of conversation among them. Page 41, first paragraph. They loved him, admired him, respected him, revered him. Even the British officer came to know the curiously extraordinary ways of their new recruit. A perceptible change crept into the atmosphere of the office. Dullness gave place to seriousness. frivolity to sobriety, worldly concerns to spiritual inquiry. The drab look of files and books of accounts stood in sharp contrast to what occupied the minds of the clerical staff. They were anxious to go to the office to feel the soothing effect of his proximity, to hear his voice and observe the changing expressions of his face, his total withdrawal into himself, and the marvelous process of waking up from his self-oblivion. It was but natural that they should, whenever they found an occasion, start some conversation about the matters that occupied their minds, about his trances, his understanding of life and his purpose, if it had any. Some were there, however, who out of religious prejudices or plain vanity did not like the attention paid to him and lodged complaints against him to the officers that Mangat was ever busy with his spiritual discourses and did not pay any attention to his work. However, no shortcoming could be found when his work was examined. Comment. His colleagues loved, admired, and revered him. The atmosphere of the office changed. Worldly concerns gave place to spiritual inquiry. His colleagues were anxious to go to the office to feel his soothing and calming personality. Some jealous persons did not like the attention given to Mangatji. They complained to the supervisors that he was ever busy with spiritual discourses and neglecting his work. However, no shortcoming could be found when his work was examined. Page 41, a master and a seeker, bottom paragraph. Colleagues turned into friends, more than friends. Intimations they sought from the deeps within him, whether at office or on the way home. Lives and teachings of various seers and sages were discussed, and the content of ancient scriptures and the symbolic meanings of mythical legends or icons. One day after office, discussion started about the life of Prahlad, a legendary character described in mythical works called Puranas. His father, the legend says, proclaimed himself God, which claim his son, a young lad, declined to accept. The differences became sharp, the conflicts bitter, and the father, an arrogant king, gave orders that Prahlad be tied to a red-hot iron pillar. Let his God, the king said, save him if he could. The order was obeyed, but the son came out of the monstrous ordeal unscathed and unscarred. Agni, the god of fire, turning all benign to him. This, in brief, was the story, the truth of which was strongly questioned by some in the group. No one, they said, could survive that ordeal. No one, they said, could survive that ordeal. Stories of this kind were mere creations of sick or hypocritical minds. Stories of this kind were mere creations of sick or hypocritical minds. In silence, he heard the heated dispute that followed. Eventually, the matter was referred to him. Men of God, he said, do not, will not display their miraculous powers. They have neither the will to do so, nor have they the vanity. They have neither the will to do so, nor have they the vanity. Miracles are happenings, not conscious actions. Time comes when they find themselves in difficult, impossible circumstances, then Prakriti, nature herself comes to their aid to do the undoable. Sometimes some pig-headed people too come into their contact, those that have not the ability to perceive or to understand. To give rise to faith in such hard-hearted people, to make them lick their life and being to the Lord, men of God turn gracious to them and do things which are out of the ordinary and the understandable. Comment. His colleagues turned into friends and more than friends. One day there was a heated discussion about Prahlad described in Hindu mythical works. His father, an arrogant king, punished Prahlad by tying him to a red-hot iron pillar. But according to the legend, he was not harmed by the fire. Some persons in the group said that this legend is a fiction. Mangat said that men of God do not want to display miracles. Sometimes when they are in impossible circumstances, nature herself comes to their aid. Sometimes they are gracious and are forced to display miracles to bring faith to faithless, hard-hearted, and pig-headed persons. Some among his associates did not agree with what he said. One among them said, "There can be no such devotee, not these days, nor can there be a miracle of this kind." In response to this observation, he said, "Even if miracles were to happen before you, you would not have the true faith. They will evoke only amazement and applause from you. Learn something from what the prophets of old did. The gurus of old and those they call incarnations of the Lord. Never did they deviate from their allegiance to the truth. Never did they forsake that anchor, that breath of their life. O you lovers of the Lord, leave the poor men of God to themselves, provoke them not. In that lie the good of all, their joy and happiness. Do you not ever be arrogant unto them? Humility alone should be your bearing in their presence." One of his colleagues said, comment, one of his colleagues said, "There can be no such devotee, nor can there be a miracle of this kind these days." Mangat said that even if a miracle happened before you, you would not have true faith. It would evoke only amazement and applause from you. You need to learn from your gurus and prophets of old. Instead of being arrogant, you should be humble before them. Maharaji did not sleep for many years. A cup of tea was his only nourishment for several years. It's not biologically possible for a human body to survive under such circumstances. Even though his whole life was a miracle, people still did not believe in him. Page 43, first paragraph. A tandoor, a baking receptacle, hot and flaming, lay nearby. The man who had expressed his skepticism about miracles said, "Look at this tandoor. If someone were to put his hand or foot into it, sure it is that it will burn. Put your foot into it and see what happens to your devotion." All this talk about miracles is plain nonsense. They are mere fictions to please the credulous. Gross distortions are they of the actual happenings. Comment. An Indian oven, hot and flaming, lay nearby. A skeptical man said that if someone puts his hand or foot into this oven, it would burn. All this talk about miracle was pure nonsense. They were mere fictions to please the credulous people. Page 43, second paragraph. The discussion was getting spirited, but it came to a shocking halt when everyone saw that a foot of his was already in the tandoor. One among them rushed towards him and forced his foot out of the burning flames. Not a hair had been burnt, not a nerve had been injured. A breathless, open-mouthed astonishment, a stunning amazement was writ large in their eyes and their expressions. All silent they stood. Their body language spoke of the shattering of their ways of thinking, of their views, inherited or acquired. Awestruck and speechless, they fell at his feet, seeking his forgiveness for their sense of friendship for him, the innocent liberties they had taken with him, for, in a word, taking him for a human being, a man among them, one belonging to their own species. For sublime he appeared, more than man, a being sent they knew not from where to admonish them, to chasten them, to show them the way and the path. Seeing their astonishment, their oppressive awe, their breathless wonder, Gurudeva said in a voice almost unrecognizable, "You love the Lord. Obstinacy does not behove men of this sort, nor does self-assurance. The past events are not mere fabrications that could be trifled with. Take them seriously, consider them cautiously, and take a leaf out of the lives of your revered forefathers. Those who have given up everything for the sake of the Lord are poor and deprived because of their ardent seeking for Him, can make or mar alike. But as companions are you now, so entertain no fears, but be heedful in the future. Let this happening remain confined within you. Let there be no mention of it anywhere to anyone. The will of the Lord was such that this had to happen. Maybe your life and being will get oriented towards the truth. Maybe you will have the faith that saves and redeems." Comment. Their spirited discussion came to a shocking halt when everyone saw that a foot of Maharaji was already in the burning oven. One of them rushed and forced his foot out of the burning flames. Not a hair had been burnt. Their ways of thinking were shattered. Awestruck, they fell at his feet, seeking his forgiveness for the innocent liberties they had taken with him. They took him for a human being, one belonging to their own species, but he appeared more than man to admonish them and show them the path. Maharaji told them that the past events were not mere fabrication that could be trifled with. Men of God can make or mar alike. He told them not to mention that even to others. Maharaji did not want to do any miracles. This miracle happened to remove our lack of faith and skepticism. We need to learn that Maharaji was not ordinary person, just like because he had eyes, ears, and human body like us. We need to learn that Maharaji was not an ordinary person just because he had eyes, ears, and human body like us. We cannot reach God. So God reached to us in the human body of Maharaji. We do not love God, but God loved us and came to us in a human form. Why do we say that God does not love us? This is the best proof of God's love. He comes to fallen and undeserving people like us in a human form. He leaves his abode of bliss and accepts to be born in this flawed world full of suffering. And he goes through suffering just like other people. This example shows that God loves us much more than we love him. This event turned them, page 44, a master and a seeker, first paragraph. The event turned them into devotees, mute and obedient. Awesome became his presence, holy and sacred, which one could, if repentant, revere and worship, but not get familiar with. As for Gurudeva or Maharaji, the occurrence made him inward oriented almost completely. All conversation stopped, all inquiries, all questions and answers. He avoided human company and resorted to solitude as he had done at Gangotia. It was, however, too much for those who had seen the event to keep it within them as a secret not to be revealed. They were bound to speak about it to some, with the result that the news spread among many, prompting them to have a glimpse of the man of miracles. Whatever the effect of the happening produced on its beholders, it became a misery for him, forcing him to resign his job and leave the town. Comment. This event turned his colleagues into devotees. His presence became awesome for them. All conversation stopped. They could not keep this secret to themselves. The news of the miracle spread and many persons started to come for a glimpse of Maharaji. It became a misery for him. It forced him to resign his job and leave the town. Page 44, a master and seeker, Second paragraph. His companions turned devotees went to his house to request him to take back his resignation. But Gurudeva was not open to their persuasive effort. They, his colleagues, knew that he did not need a job. One that could command the elements had no need to serve wretched mortals. All that they sought was his nearness, his proximity. Men of the world sometimes get deeply attached to those who have no concern with it. That is the strange paradox about narcissistic humanity. Comment. His companions turned devotees went to his house and requested him to take back his resignation. But Mangat ji did not agree. They sought his nearness, his proximity, and peace of mind. They had become deeply attached to him. We hear stories of how companions of Krishna became deeply attached to him. Page 44, bottom paragraph. His boss too asked him to take back his resignation, impressing upon him that a job of that kind was hard to get. It might not fall his way again. To this well-meant suggestion, his reply was, "This can serve only one master, not two." The boss was an Englishman. The conversation was being carried on through an interpreter. "If you, Mangatram," said the boss, "remain here, I will see to it that you rise in your career and life." Gurudeva or Maharaji folded his hands and asked the interpreter to say to him, "Let the Sahib kindly say what he has found that he would give to this servant of his." Hearing this reply, the boss could just smile as a response. Nevertheless, he refused to accept the resignation. Gurudeva, however, had made up his mind. He had decided not to attend the office from the first day of the following month, whether the Sahib accepted his resignation or did not. So, one day at the dead of the night, he left Peshawar for Gangotia. The term of his service was less than a year. Comment. His boss also asked him to take back his resignation, impressing upon him that the job of that kind was hard to get. He also said that he would be promoted in the future. He refused to accept Mangatji's resignation, but Maharaji had made up his mind. So one day, at the dead of the night, he left the city of Peshawar for his home village, Gangotia. Page 45, A Master and a Seeker, first paragraph. Mother was naturally happy to see her son, thinking he had come on leave. However, her happiness changed into grief when she came to know that he had resigned his job. But not a word of censure or of sorrow came out of her lips. For years she had borne with the burden of his ways, in silence and apparent patience. Now too she did the same. The relations too took this action of his as irresponsible, the result of a diseased thinking. He, on his part, ignored their opinion, for he had come back from Peshawar fully determined to snap off all interactions and social relationships. Communications with others had resulted in his being provoked into showing his miraculous powers, an act he found to be a stumbling block in the way to his goal. Comment. His mother was happy to see him, thinking that he had come on leave. However, her happiness turned into grief when she came to know that he had resigned his job. She tolerated the burden of his ways in silence and apparent patience. His relatives called him irresponsible. He ignored their opinion. Page 45, page 45, bottom paragraph. The dangers and the pitfalls of associating with the men of the world had now become fully obvious to the master. So he resorted to solitude to give himself up to silent meditation, give himself up to it almost exclusively, saying goodbye to all thoughts of his safety and interests. Pangs of hunger seemed to have almost disappeared, so had the torments of thirst, and so the heaviness of sleeplessness. What could be the explanation of this phenomena, incredible as it would seem to those who never have had an opportunity of seeing him in person? A stray remark he once made would perhaps give us a hint to understand a little of this mystery. Once the true being of the self manifests itself within, there remains no consciousness of the body at all. If for a moment or so it happens to revive, then the body appears different from oneself, a shadow as it were. No interest remains then for its remaining or not remaining. Comment. Mangat gave himself exclusively to meditation. His hunger, thirst, and sleep almost disappeared. Page 46, first paragraph. A 20-year-old young man is not supposed to be a solitary monk, disinterested in everything that those at his age are necessarily interested in. The maternal instinct could not possibly bear this disinterestedness, especially in the times when the bonds of family life were strong, when individuality could not be imagined outside the ambit of those bonds. Mother suffered in silence and for long, her suffering eventually ending up in illness. Other relations too were worried about his future. His half-brother, Pandit Kishan Chand, suggested that Mangat should establish some handlooms. The British had seen to it that the prosperity they enjoyed as the result of the Industrial Revolution should not reach India. So the business of hand weaving was quite popular among the not well-to-do in those pre-industrial days. Consequently, the suggestion appealed to mother, who urged her son to take up the business of weaving. He accepted her suggestion, taking it to be an order, as it were, and established some handlooms at a small town called Sagari, a 4-mile distance from Gangotia. Some weavers were employed, and the weaving started, with results as could well be imagined disastrous. This commentator will stop here. Comment. A 20-year-old young man is not supposed to be a solitary monk, disinterested in everything. His mother suffered in silence, and her suffering eventually ended up in illness. His half brother suggested that he should establish some handlooms. His mother urged him to take up the business of weaving. He accepted her suggestion, taking it to be an order. Some handlooms were established in a small town nearby. The weaving was started, but the results were disastrous. So this commentator will now skip to page 47, bottom paragraph. Page 47, bottom paragraph. The young man who was trying to weave a cloth that would clothe him in the glory of no being, that is the true being, could not, as was inevitable, succeed in the business venture he had been made to undertake. Soon, too soon, the results became visible. No work, no sale, only a loss after a loss. Things came to such a pass that no money was left even to pay the workers' wages. As for the entrepreneur, he always waited for the evening to suspend that mess for the next day and spend the night in the real work, the only work that could be called worth undertaking. Eventually, the mess turned into utter chaos and the work had to be stopped forever. A few things he distributed among the workers and other people around. The rest he left them where they were and went back home. It was left to his half-brothers to dispose of the things and the gadgets. He never visited the place again. Comment. Mangat, who was trying to weave a cloth that would clothe him in the glory of God, could not succeed in this business venture he was forced to undertake. There was no work, no sale, only a loss after a loss. No money was left even to pay the workers' wages. As for Mangat, he was always waited for the evening to suspend that mess for the next day and spend the night in meditation, the only work worth undertaking. Eventually, the mess turned into utter chaos and the work had to be stopped forever. A few things he distributed among the people, the rest he left them where they were and went back home. It was left to his half-brothers to dispose those things. He never visited the place again. Page 48, first paragraph. The routine of his life regained its earlier rhythm. The days passed by in the Pir Khwaja and the nights along the banks of the trail that wound its course among the ups and downs of that landscape. Dawns brightened into mornings, mornings into days, the days melted into evenings, and evenings into nights. The moon continued to wax and wane. The seasons came to bloom and to wither, and the years came to disappear. Rains fell down and storms came to uproot and destroy, but nothing could make him change his ways. A little past midnight, he would go out for his solitary meditation, to return at 10 in the morning. An incredibly light meal followed by a little rest prepared him again to resort to the shades of the Pir Khwaja. No relationship he had, no dealings with the world around him. His relations, brothers or sisters, too snapped off all links with him and withdrew the financial help, saying quite legitimately in their way, that no purpose could be served by helping a born idler. So things were getting really difficult at home. The prospect of starvation becoming a real possibility, rather a high probability. At last, a day came when mother told him that she had nothing at home to cook for the following day. So this commentator will stop here. Comment. He resumed spending his days in the forest and nights along the banks of the river again. Rains or storms nothing could make him change his routine. His meals were incredibly light. His relatives snapped off links with him and withdrew financial help, saying that no purpose could be served by helping a born idler. The prospect of starvation became a high probability. One day, his mother told him that she had nothing at home to cook for the following day. This writer will now skip to page 50, first paragraph. Page 50, a master and a seeker, first paragraph. It came to happen that his thoughts went on their own. It came to happen that his thoughts went on their own accord to herbs and roots. He had seen, when at Kallar, his brother-in-law extracting medicinal drugs out of them, and knew the curative effects of some among them. He brought a book of indigenous medicine from him, and rapidly glanced through it and prepared some medicines, following the instructions given therein. He was not certain of their efficacy, could not be, given the fact he knew nothing about medicines or about the traditional account of them. Yet he administered them to some poor patients, mostly his acquaintances, with no thought, no idea of what they could do or bring about. The surprise of the surprises for him was that the patients got cured and would come back to thank. The surprise of surprises for him was that the patients got cured and would come to thank him. The phenomenon encouraged him, and he started administering medicines to whoever approached him, with the result that the number of people who came for cure increased manifold. Within 6 months, their number swelled to such an extent that he had to fix up a regular time for them. Comment. At this time, God provided for him. It came to happen that his thoughts went on their own to herbs and roots. He had seen in the past his brother-in-law extracting medicinal drugs out of them, and knew the curative effect of some among them. He brought a book of indigenous medicine from him and prepared some medicines. He gave them to some poor patients. The surprise of surprises was that the patients with serious illness The surprise of surprises was that the patients with serious illnesses got cured. Patients started coming to him for treatment, and their number swelled more and more. So this commentator will skip to page 51, first paragraph. The medicine he administered to his patients could hardly be called medicines even according to the traditional system. They consisted of common herbs and essences of ordinary stuff for common use, like antiseeds and dry ginger, and yet they produced incredible results. What were considered incurable diseases by modern system of medicine in those days, diseases like tuberculosis, were cured by these things, which, by no stretch of imagination, could kill the bacteria responsible for those diseases. So he became, before long, a great physician in the eyes of the villagers who had most among so he became before long a great physician in the eyes of villagers who had most of among them neither the awareness of nor the means to afford modern treatment. It was but natural that those near and around him should get jealous and shower curses and abuses upon him. How this novice, this ignoramus absolute, they declared, could be a physician. Let those who go to him for a cure get their graves dug, for sure is it that they will not come back alive. Such was the praise he received, such the fame, and such a name. This criticism had, however, no force against the plain facts. Patients in large numbers continued to pour in from villages far away and distant. He would examine them from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. He would also visit those among them who were too ill to travel, charging no fee and accepting no hospitality from them. On many occasions, he had to go to distant villages to see his patients. Miles he would cover on foot, rendering impossible his reaching back home on time. So, on returning, he would sit on the rock along the trail, his usual seat, and spend the night there itself to return home at the right time, 9 a.m. There were times when it would get dark on the way itself. On such occasions, he would select some solitary place for his meditation, but would see to it that he reached home at 9, where he knew patients would be waiting for him. Comment. The medicines he administered to his patients consisted of common herbs, but they produced incredible results. Diseases like tuberculosis, incurable in those days, were being cured. So he became a great physician in the eyes of villagers who had no means to afford modern treatment. Even though many persons criticized him for lack of medical training, patients in large number continued to pour in from distant villages. He would examine them from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. On many occasions, he had to go to distant villages on foot to see the patients who were too ill to travel. He charged them no fee and accepted no hospitality. Page 52, first paragraph. While dispensing medicines to his patients, he would invariably give them a prescription. While dispensing medicines to his patients, he would invariably give them a precaution or two. Precautions that would make any physician smile, traditional or modern. He would say, abstain from meat eating and drinking and be straightforward in your dealings. While measuring out things for your customers, measure them right. While weighing out things for them, weigh them right and see to it that no word of deception or falsehood escapes your lips. A sound medical advice, no doubt, and especially to those for whom life meant little else than the acts and the things he would ask them to refrain or abstain from. Another characteristic of this medical practice also we should not fail to mention. He never asked for any payment. in cash or in kind. Some among his patients would leave behind some cereals or some fresh vegetables they grew in their fields. They had no cash to offer. Some among them, when cured, would leave some money too. But the majority of the villagers lived in utter poverty and destitution. Many were there who could not afford proper diet, not to speak of purchasing medicines. For people living or breathing in such unhappy circumstances, he would provide food too, in addition to medicines. And nurse too would he them, cleaning them of their body, cleaning them of the bodily filth. Comment. While dispensing medicines to his patients, he advised them to refrain from meat eating and drinking, and to be straightforward in their dealings. He never asked for any payment in cash or in kind. Some patients would leave behind some cereals, fresh vegetables, or cash. But the majority of his patients were destitute. He would provide food in addition to medicines. He would also clean their bodily filth. So, this concludes episode 3 of story of Saint Mangat Ramji. It will be continued in episode 4.